Hello everyone. This is the second lecture on new criticism, and in my previous lecture I have already discussed about the rise of new criticism, but in this lecture I'm going to talk about the features of new criticism. And we actually know that the emergence of new criticism is strongly influenced by some kind of socio-political change, or we can say even turmoils, right? Because the evils of rapid industrialization and urbanization and the consequent increase in ugliness, the post-war pessimism, all generated a kind of escape from the ugly surroundings in which Americans were living, right? And to others, the new criticism demanding a close concentration on a work of art and provided a welcome escape, at least for the time being, from their unsatisfactory environment. So we know that new criticism is an Anglo-American version of formalism, and it is obvious that new critics derived some basic ideas from formalism. So now I'm going to discuss about some of the basic features of new criticism. And the first feature, we can say that the poem or any work of art is a complete thing to new critics. Poem is very important. The structure of poem is very important to new critics because their all attention and focus were on the structure of a poem or a literary work. Their only task was to analyze, interpret, and evaluate a work of art. They considered a poem as a separate entity from the poet and his social backgrounds. The critic must devote himself to close reading of a text. So, this is the first feature. Now, the second feature is that new criticism is that thing and which is a critical movement that propagates the idea of art for art's sake because it focuses on the artistic techniques and forms of a literary work, moral and religious considerations, social and political conditions, and author's biography all were very irrelevant in the field of new criticism. In the way of understanding literature, they rejected all these things. So this is the second feature. Now the third feature is that new criticism is pedagogical in its emphasis and practice, and it is not hampered by any literary theory. So using of any kind of theories like structuralism, post-structuralism, or Marxism were not in the field of new criticism. The fourth feature is that it concentrated on the text only as an autonomous entity. It is formalistic in the true sense of the term. We can say that new criticism is very formalistic in its approach. And the new critics were obsessed with form, design, and texture of poetry or a literary work. The fifth feature is that words, images, rhythms, meter, and all these literary devices constitute the form of poetry, and for this reason, the arrangement of words and the way in which they act are really very important here. The denotative, or we can say literal meaning, and the connotative, or we can say figurative meaning, give value to a text or a literary work. So, various kinds of figures of speech or rhetorics um, are very important in this sense. The sixth feature is that poetry is the communication and language is the medium of communication. We know that. So they actually try to understand the meaning of a poem through a study of poetic language. So poetic language is very important here. The next feature is that new critics were opposed to historical and comparative methods of criticism. They were actually opposed to the historical and comparative methods of criticism. They didn't accept it. So next feature is that the form of literary language is inseparable from its content and its meaning. So what a text means and how it means are one and the same thing, and the work has an ideal organic unity in which all elements contribute to create an invisible whole, right? So this is the number 8 feature. And the number 9 feature is that new criticism is an intrinsic criticism. It is an intrinsic criticism. It is not an external criticism because it exists within the area, within the sphere of a text. একটা টেক্সটের পরিধির মধ্যেই পুরোপুরি নিউ ক্রিটিসিজম থাকছে. We have to remember this thing. And the last feature of new criticism is that it prefers poetic text over narrative or dialogic text for interpretation, because new criticism mostly examines aspects like ambiguity, irony, and paradox. So, to conclude, we can say that the psychological state of the poet at the time of creation, as well as the effect of the poem upon the readers' minds, are not to be allowed to divert or to distract the attention of readers from the text. So these are some of the basic features of new criticism we need to remember. And in my next lecture, I'll talk about some of the main proponents of new criticism, or main pioneers of new criticism.